So now that we have understood the basics of how strings are represented in C, let us try and write a function that takes a string argument and returns a string as its return value. So as an example, let us consider this function, toIndLower. So this converts US English spelling to lowercase Indian English spelling. So for example, this word color spelt with the American spelling gets converted to color the way we spell it. And favorite, all caps, gets converted to favorite with a U, and analyze with a Z or a Z as the Americans say gets converted to analyze with an S. And here is the logic for doing this. Firstly, convert the word to lowercase, and then check if the word is one of the words we know how to convert. Now you might be wondering, well, what about all the other words? Well, we'll wait on that. For now, let's just translate this Python code into C. So if it's one of these, we know how to translate it. If none of these conditions hold, then we just return the word as it is. So for example, a word like and is spelt the same in both US spelling and in Indian spelling. So those words we won't modify, except we might convert it into lowercase. Now what would this code look like in C? Let me show this to you on Python Tutor. I'm going to show you an incomplete piece of code, and we will gradually complete it as we learn. So let's start by comparing some differences in syntax. Remember that in C, you first specify the type of the return value of the function. Here I'm saying that this function is going to return char star, which is one of the ways of representing strings in C. The function name is toIndLower, just like in Python, and the parameter is of type char star. So we're going to take a char star as input, and we're going to return a char star. Now I want you to quickly skip ahead to the main, where we're actually going to call this function. Here we're going to call this with this word, but notice that this word is initialized using the other syntax, char with square brackets. It turns out when you're writing a C function, you can use char star always, regardless of whether the string actually was of type char star or char square brackets. This will accept both forms. So I prefer using char star over here. Some people prefer using this syntax, but I will stick to this form. Now this syntax that starts with slash star and ends with star slash, this is C's multi-line comment. We have already seen that a single line comment, similar to Python's hash symbol, is // But if you want to write a multi-line comment, you write it in between slash star and star slash. We don't have doc tests in C, so here I've just written this in English, that as an example, toIndLower of color, C-O-L-O-R, returns color the way we write it, and so on. Now the reason this code is incomplete is I haven't actually translated this line, which we will do in a minute. But the rest seems quite familiar. If the word is color, remember in C we have to put our expressions inside brackets, and then remember we like putting curly brackets even if we have only a single statement inside our if. So if word is color, we return color. If word is favorite, we return favorite, and so on, and finally we return word. And down here in the main, I'm going to call this with this American spelling of color, and hopefully this will print C-O-L-O-U-R. Let's click on Visualize Execution and see how this works. Now, before we click on Visualize Execution, let's scroll down and see if there are any warnings. Indeed, there are. It's telling us, warning, comparison with string literal results in unspecified behavior. What does that mean? Well, it turns out that this syntax that we have got comfortable with for comparing two objects by value in Python, for example two strings, that does not have the same meaning or semantics in C. Once again, an example of the dangers of assuming that just because the syntax looks the same, the meaning must be the same. So it turns out this is not the correct way of comparing two strings to see if they are the same. This test for equality is syntactically correct, but semantically it doesn't do what we want, and the compiler is warning us. The compiler is telling us that you probably don't want to do this because in this particular case, this will result in unspecified behavior. Once again, behavior with the American spelling. But let's go ahead and fix this code to compare strings the correct way. So it turns out in C, if you want to compare two strings, you don't do a test for equality like this. You have to hash include a helper function. So we will hash include from the special header file string.h. We will hash include a function, and that function is called string compare, but it's spelled strcmp. And it takes two arguments, the first string and the second string. So if these two are equal, then we want to return color. Unfortunately, the string compare function returns 0 if the two strings are equal. And the meaning of this, if we leave it this way, is if the two strings are not equal. Why? Because 0 is falsy. So we would have to write if string compare of these two strings is equal to 0. Now, why is string compare written in this strange way? Well, it turns out the string compare function is useful because it returns a negative number if the first string is lexicographically smaller than the second one, and it returns a positive integer if the first string is lexicographically larger, and it returns 0 if the two strings are identical. So the strcmp function can be used to compare two strings, but we have to remember that it returns 0 in case the strings are equal. So if these two strings are equal, then return color, and similarly for the rest. Now let us go to visualize execution and see if we still have any warnings. This time we don't see any warnings.